Tucker Carlson calling out Nikki Haley and Ben Shapiro for allegedly calling for the United States to support international conflict. Carlson told comedian Russell Brand during a recent interview, "I've got 4 draft-age children. If you're playing recklessly fast and loose with their lives, then I have a right to despise you, and I do. If you're Nikki Haley, who's running for president, or Ben Shapiro, or half the people I see on television casually mentioning the possibility of nuclear war, or sending Americans to fight in the Middle East, or in any way involving us in a war that has nothing to do with prosperity and peace at home, then I have a right to call you out and be really, really offended."
Shapiro responded to Carlson's comments, writing on X, "Tucker is simply lying about my positions. I've been calling for a negotiated end to the Ukraine war, freezing the lines of conflict since early on in the war. I have never called for American boots on the ground in Ukraine, ever. I have never called for American boots to defend Israel, ever. I've invited Tucker to sit down multiple times over the past few weeks to clear the air and discuss our differences. He said he's willing, but his team has told us that he's busy for months because of all his foreign travel. That offer remains open." Am I detecting a little shade about his travel? Obviously an allusion to his trip to Russia to interview Putin?
Probably. Tucker has come for Ben Shapiro a lot lately, or over the last maybe year or two. So I'm sure Ben Shapiro's feeling the heat. These are 2 tremendously popular conservative commentators, pundits, with very different views on foreign policy that are emblematic of the split on the right. Now, Ben Shapiro's correct that he's never actually, I don't think, specifically called for American ground troops. I mean, maybe he has decades ago, but...
That seems like nitpicking, because Tucker was making a broader statement about what a whole category of people say, and, you know...
And on that front, he has certainly called for continued and
endless investments in Israel in particular. Yeah.
Yes.
So I
and
think
Ukraine, and Ukraine. He was been, from the beginning, though, again, the right, more of the right, his viewers and readers and the online conservative people who follow conservative media are all very skeptical of Ukraine funding. He has been consistently for it.
Yeah, and, you know, I appreciate that finally these things are opening up, because I do think a lot of politicians, a lot of figureheads on the right, like Ron DeSantis, were able to kind of use ambiguity to their advantage. And this is really exposing where people stand. Frankly, and all of these votes that are happening are now not happening. We just covered that Johnson is not going to bring the bill to even get voted on, the Senate bill. Is that you're finally getting to see what people's real positions are and aren't able to kind of enjoy this stolen valor of, oh, conservatives are better on foreign policy than Democrats. Conservatives are better on being against endless wars than Democrats. What we're seeing is that there are some, but they are discrete and frankly a minority. And I think Ben Shapiro's position here is frankly the more mainstream one, as evidenced by how foaming at the mouth the liberal media has been about Tucker Carlson in a way that they have not been about Ben Shapiro, with whom they are very much aligned on the issue of Ukraine and Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly the more mainstream position, more popular position among many political elites in both parties, but it's, I mean, among the young right, among the massive conservative audiences for YouTube shows and podcasts, including The Daily Wire, which is tremendously successful. Maybe Ben Shapiro has carved out for himself an audience of more hawkishly inclined young people, or maybe they just like what he says on everything else. You can like someone, appreciate their commentary, and disagree with them on a couple of issues, I hope, and maybe that's fine. But on the specific issue of Ukraine, and probably Israel too, to a greater degree than a lot of people on the right in prominent positions will appreciate, there's skepticism that this is in the best interest of American security, foreign policy, that this is money well spent, and they want to see, every time a political figure on the right comes along and sometimes takes very strident positions that are anathema to the elites on foreign policy. I think of Ron Paul being by far the most beloved among young people on the right, discounted and treated as a crazy person by much of mainstream media and conservative media for so long, even though he was drawing incredible crowds at college events, had this lasting impact, and then Trump articulating a very vocalizing many of the same things. Now, it did not at all govern in that way. We can argue about that. But the sentiment helped catapult him to the position of prominence he enjoys. It wasn't the only factor, but it was an important one.
Now, one other interesting observation I had after hearing Tucker Carlson say that he has 4 draft-age kids, that this is a very serious and personal issue for him, that he's not interested in having them be cannon fodder to fight a proxy war against Russia. That argument sounded sort of familiar to me. And the reason why it was familiar was because yesterday we covered a segment in which Joy Behar on The View was making a similar argument to a different end. So she argued that if you elect Donald Trump, you're going to end up having your draft-age children sent overseas to fight in some war that he would instigate, seeming to miss the dynamic that is emerging very much so under a Biden presidency.
Yeah, it's wild to be a professional commentator and be just like that far off from reality. Right now, Republicans under the influence of Trump are killing this increased spending, increased foreign involvement bill. So I don't know what the argument is. That maybe it's just because Trump. I mean, she explicitly views him as Hitler. Earlier in that clip, she said, "You know who else?"
Yeah, I don't want to compare people to Hitler, but
yeah,
yeah.
So it's not a very well thought out commentary. And maybe again, we don't know. Maybe Trump will do all the same things. Maybe he will reverse course and advocate more funding for Ukraine. Maybe he will deploy American ground forces everywhere across the world. Like, you can't rule out anything. Presidents always govern in a more hawkish direction than their campaign statements would indicate, and then public will would actually have them do so. But that would kind of be a random outcome, that he would end up being more hawkish than our actual president, who is totally committed to, in what he says, continuing to fund the Ukrainian.
Yeah, look, there's a realignment here. There's a political realignment that's happening that is being invisibilized by the fact that the two major parties still have so much control, that the candidates in these races are in no way reflecting the increasingly vocally articulated desires of the public. And the distance between what our elected representatives are choosing to do and how they're choosing to act and what the public increasingly uniformly demands, not in this bipartisan, bifurcated way. On culture issues, that's one thing. But on the economic issues, on issues of foreign policy, there's increasingly unanimity. And I think that tracks with the world getting increasingly unequal, with wealth being increasingly unequally distributed, despite labor gains and productivity gains going up, meaning that people are working just as hard and they're not getting as much as a return on their investment. As social media means that the mainstream news isn't able to hide the bloody, horrific, terroristic effects of our foreign adventurism, including the imagery that's coming out of Gaza, and frankly also the imagery that's coming out of Ukraine has been frustrating to people to watch and observe, especially when it seems increasingly futile, because we could have negotiated 2 years ago and ended up in the very same place where it's likely that Ukraine is going to end up negotiating to today. And I do wonder, I think this is a moment where there's a lot of political appetite for still a political candidate to emerge that gives voice to what the people want right now. And it is really, I think, an indictment of our system, that all of the pressure that is clearly existing, the pressure that fuels Tucker's show and Tucker's audience, the millions of people who watch these episodes, are completely unmet on a political stage, and that they were able to get away with it. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Stick with us. More Rising right after this.